So it's really exciting to have this conversation this afternoon with Kim Wyman, the president of ESI Consulting and former Washington Secretary of State. You probably all know her. If you don't, you should get to know her. You'll get to know her a little bit right now, but please take the opportunity, especially like students and so on, get to know someone like Kim. She has 30 years of experience at federal, state, and county level elections and currently serves as the president of ESI Consulting, where she's committed to improving election administration and continuing her successful work to ensure that our nation's elections remain accessible, secure, and accurate. She's been working in elections about as long as I have, but I have the gray hair to prove it.
I do too.
So Kim served as the 15th Secretary of State of Washington from 2013 to 2021. And since then, she's the last Republican to have held statewide office in the state of Washington or in any of the three contiguous West Coast states. Sorry about that.
That's all right, Andy.
Kim resigned as Secretary of State on November 17, 2021, to serve as the Senior Election Security Advisor for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, in the Biden administration, where she served for just under 2 years before joining the Bipartisan Policy Center as a senior fellow. She began her 30-year career in elections as the Thurston County Elections Director, which is where I first met Kim, a long time ago in Thurston County. In 2001, she was appointed and then elected to the position of Thurston County Auditor and served in that role for 12 years before successfully running for Secretary of State. She earned her master's in public administration from Troy University and her Bachelor of Arts in communication disorders from Cal State Long Beach.
Yeah, never.
Go, what are they? Cal State Long Beach Waves or something like that?
Beach, baby. We're the
Beach babies
beach.
or something.
Yeah.
I don't even know what they are. She has served she's earned state and national election administration certifications and served in lots of leadership roles in many civic and professional organizations. She's the founding member of the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections and was inducted into the Election Center Hall of Fame in 2022. Congratulations on that honor.
Thank you.
So super excited to have Kim here for this conversation today. And again, if you have questions for Kim, you can either write them down or maybe we will actually break down and just pass the microphone around. So to start, you've started your own consulting firm, Election Security Innovation Consulting, or ESI, where you're president. Through ESI Consulting, you're working to improve election administration and continuing your work to, again, secure or to ensure that our election systems in the U.S. are secure, accessible, and accurate. So what are you currently working on?
A number of things. Probably the most fun work, I would say it's most fun work, has been with the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, and that really came out of post-2020, a group of election officials connecting with law enforcement and realizing that the two worlds had a lot in common coming out of 2020, and that those connections really did matter going into the election. So we've been doing a lot of work on how do you build in security and safety for election workers and voters, and connect with law enforcement in a way that doesn't infringe on anyone's right to vote. And so that has been really powerful, and probably the thing I'm most proud of. Been working with the Bipartisan Policy Center on workforce issues, which has been also very timely and very enlightening. And then basically really trying to partner with as many organizations as possible to just further this work. When I left the Secretary of State's office, I knew I wanted to stay in the elections field to support election professionals. 30 years of working with people from around the country, you realize the common threads we share. And for those of you in academia, election officials are really driven by that public service bug, and they really do want to have elections that represent the way people voted, and that people have I don't want to say trust. I don't want to say trust because I think that's now overused, but believe in the results and serve their communities. And this is a local function. It is not a federal function. It is not a national function. It is in local communities. So just trying to stay engaged with that and really trying to focus on how do we train and give advanced level training to those officials that CISA was serving just over a year ago, and now a lot of that is gone. I know we're going to talk about that in a second. So yeah, just trying to be value added, I guess.
What's the longer term vision for what you want to do with ESI?
Well, longer term vision, and this has been a heavier lift than I thought it was going to be, really is trying to create that higher level training for election security and really specializing in that and trying to get executive level. We have clerks and secretaries of state and auditors around the country that get elected to these positions and have never run an election before. So how do we help them be prepared, especially the one that's never going to put a ballot through a reader, the official who's never going to enter a voter registration form, but needs to understand the policy implications of election security. And so having that's kind of one area. Another area is just, again, we've got some great training. We have organizations in this room that have been doing some amazing work over the last probably 10 years to advance election training and just the knowledge base of the people working in the field. How do we take it to that next level? Because one, you're always going to have the turnover of new people entering, but what about that election official who's been doing their job for 5 to 10 years? How do we keep that training and those certifications relevant? So my dream is to have a certification and training program at a university, just randomly throwing that out to the universe and having it have a national, not only presence, but impact.
Mm-hmm. That's a great vision. So one of the ways I see this is that you're really trying to step into a lot of the void that's been created because of the demise of CISA. So can you talk for folks who may not know what CISA was doing while you were there about what y'all were up to and what the importance of that work was?
Sure, and I'm going to take a little bit of privilege here since I have the microphone to walk back to 2016. And as I look around the room, there's a number of people in this room that made what I'm about to talk about happen. In 2016, we were all blissfully unaware that Russian bad actors were trying to get into our systems until we detected that Russian bad actors were trying to get into our systems. And that was a seminal moment on multiple levels. First, the fact that we had nation-state actors trying to get into U.S. elections, and it was unifying in a lot of ways. And all of a sudden, it became the top thing. Cybersecurity became the top issue for election officials, and we didn't know anything about it, to be honest with you, other than what our IT people had told us. And so, at that point in time, I think before we detected it in our system, our whole focus was keeping people out of our system. Then when we started actually meeting with, federal people and meeting with experts in the community over the next 2 years, we started to realize that there had to be a shift. And probably the most seminal thing I remember in about 2018 was that shift from keeping people out to, yes, we want to keep people out, but then what are you going to do when you have an event? How are you going to respond? How are you going to recover? And more importantly, how do you build resilience? And so this was all happening, and at that time, under the Obama administration and then the Trump administration, CISA was created. And this was by CISA was created under the Trump administration, but elections were designated as critical infrastructure. And this was also one of those really key pivotal moments because that designation allowed me as a state official and my local election officials to have access to federal resources that we had never had before, where now we could work directly with the FBI. We were already working with the ESI, but we could have access to intelligence and information that we didn't have before. And you would think that would be an easy switch, but it wasn't, because there were people like myself who were very leery of the federal government trying to come in and take over elections at the local level, at the state level. It's a state's function. We know that because it's in the Constitution. So there were a number of us that were leery of this. Oh, you're going to give us a bunch of free stuff with no strings? I don't trust it. I don't, just call me crazy. And so over that time, one of the most probably significant changes was Chris Krebs came in as the first director of CISA, and he was brilliant and hired Matt Masterson, who was a former EAC commissioner. And Matt had a credibility in the election space that allowed him to work with people across the country in a way that we trusted. And from 2018 to 2020, it was remarkable, the training and the conversations and the network that was really established of not only the communication with the federal government, but access to declassified but intelligence that really helped us make risk assessments. The elections, the EI-ISAC, the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Assessment Center was born. This was a way that we could in real time be getting information about what was happening in the threat sphere. And just mostly this build out of this communication that we just didn't have before 2016. And then we go into 2020, and as I said, we'd shifted to resilience being our focus. And thank God we did, because we were all worried about, cyber attacks. We were worried about physical security, all sorts of things. Part of your plan, you had an incident response plan or a COOP plan, and part of that plan had, pandemics. That'll never happen, but we have to have it in there. Oh, thank goodness we did, because that resilience we had built into the ecosystem made us able to deal with the pandemic. I look back at 2020 and what we were able to accomplish, and by we, I mean election officials on the ground in local communities, is remarkable. And the thing I don't think any of us saw coming certainly was the backlash we were going to receive from the right and from the people that thought the election was stolen. But it was like, we just pulled off the most amazing election in history. Where's my ticker tape parade? What do you mean I have protesters outside of my office? Wait, and so the irony of all of that preparation was, it was, as Chris Krebs said, the most secure election our country had ever run. And at the same time, that was weaponized. And those of us who have been in the space long enough know that those were seeds of doubt that were planted by foreign adversaries with information campaigns that were designed, influence campaigns that were designed to divide Americans, to undermine confidence in our election system, to make people believe that the election wasn't fair. And unfortunately, all of that sowing of those seeds from probably 2014 to 2020 really was the perfect ground for what became, the post-2020 and, up to this time, doubt that now, you can't trust the system. You can't trust election results. You can't trust election officials. So I think the real proof of the proof in the pudding is 24. So from 2020 to 24, there was just more of the same, trying to build in that resilience and build out the sector. And like I said, there are a number of people in this room that made all of that happen. And I think the best example of that success was, and many of you may not know this, but in 2024, over 250 bomb threats were called into polling places and called into election offices who were counting ballots. And the significant part about that is there wasn't any major disruption. We weren't hearing news reports of polling places being shut down for 4 or 5 hours and having to go to a court and extend the voting period. There weren't any injuries. And part of that was because of this information sharing and that communication that had been built. That was one of the things that we were exercising. Local election officials and state election officials were anticipating that you could have something at scale because of AI that could be a threat. So how are you going to respond when it happens? And so when those bomb threats started coming in, they were coming in over email, which was the first flag. And the community was able to communicate that information so they could make a really good risk analysis of what was happening on the ground. So let's see, this looks like it's coming from, Iran. And it was by email, and it was sent on Friday, and they said that they're going to detonate the bomb anytime now. I don't think that's as credible a threat as it could be. So we're going to just have the bomb squad go through the polling place while people are voting and just see if there's any suspicious whatever. And so that's a huge success. And I guess, where I'll kind of end this is what I'm really concerned about is most of that is gone now. Unfortunately, starting in the beginning of this year, CISA has been dismantled. You look, today, pretty much all of the leadership, the people who are really driving that organization in a positive way, have been let go or fired or have moved on to other things. They discontinued the funding of the EII SAC and the MSI SAC, so now information sharing is difficult. The task force on foreign influence has been disbanded. So the work that was done by, the Office of ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the FBI are no longer taking that data and declassifying it and sharing it with election officials. So what we're seeing kind of in the aftermath is a whole bunch of organizations trying to fill those gaps. And this community is really resilient, and I know we will, but it's very scary as we're looking into next year, not having that network that we had going into 2024.
Thanks for recounting all that. I think it's important history to keep in mind, and really important context for the conversations we're having about how the new technologies, pose threats, but also provide opportunities. So I think we're in I won't say I think, we are in a kind of perilous situation where I think that the seeds of distrust that you were talking about that got sowed, they've sprouted and they've grown, right? But I do think that the work that CISA did to build that resilience in the election official community still does exist and provides something of a foundation moving forward. So what are some of the things that you think need to be done to kind of continue the work that CISA was doing that aren't currently being done? In particular, let's start by the election official community.
Well, I think there's a lot of really good work being done. In fact, again, people in this room are doing it. CTCL is trying to look at that strategically and how to move forward. I know the elections group is really leading that charge and trying to fill a lot of that training and information space of how do you help election officials continue to move forward. I think that where the biggest gaps are is that those communication channels that were just in place at the federal level, so it was very easy for a state to have their fusion center, their local fusion center or fusion centers for bigger states, be connected in real time, say on election day or the days leading in, and have that direct communication with election officials. That's the piece I'm probably most worried about. Again, I know there are a number of groups, CIS, a number of groups that are trying to work to fill that, but it's going to be more difficult because you don't have that centralized national leadership and infrastructure. I mean, the infrastructure is what we lost. That's probably off the top of my head.
Okay, that's a big one, and I think that is an important gap. But let me ask the same question from the research community's perspective. I mean, we have some of the primary researchers in this area here, and we certainly can talk to the rest. What should the academic community, the election science community, be doing to try to help fill these voids?
Well, one of the things I think back on, particularly in 2020, when misuse and malinformation were top of mind, and CISA was in the middle of it, kind of building the plane as they went, trying to figure out how to use all that information. And I think that's part of what leads to today is so much of that information was focused on how do we separate out truth from fiction and things that are trying to be maliciously undermining our elections. What we've lost is some of that powerful research that was coming out of Stanford and the University of Washington in particular on just them tracking what was happening on the internet and what they were seeing in terms of trends. And I think this is one of those places where AI can help and where the research community can help is that data crunching and that for an election official, they don't have time to go through. They love your reports. And a 30-page dissertation on something is really cool. They don't have time to read it. What they need is actionable information that they can use on the ground. So, what trends are we seeing out there? And I think we have to obviously be very careful about people's constitutional right to free speech, and we all want to respect that. but how do you prepare election officials for being able to respond to things that are just absolutely not true? They're just letting anybody walk into the polling place. They're not checking ID, and it doesn't matter who you are because they're not tracking it. Easy to throw that out on the internet. It can go viral if it's the right person saying the right thing. So how can we get ahead of that and give election officials tools or ways to communicate what they do, why those safeguards are real, how they protect things? And you certainly can pre-bunk some of this stuff, but in real time, when we get into the heat of the 26th election, and certainly in 28, what are things that can just be rolled up so they can make those risk-based analysis about where they should be spending their time? There's a lot of things that AI can help in terms of comms and help them create content, but getting some of that information and that data that was being provided before, and I don't know how the research community does that, and I don't know how all of you in academia cover that, but that's where I see a big gap, and we've got to figure out a way to give those tools back to the election officials.
So providing some of that basic intelligence on emerging threats, right? But doing so in a way that summarizes it in kind of an effective, actionable way.
Yes. And then I think also too, and I know there's some great work coming out of, I want to say it's Rhode Island, University in Rhode Island, but I can't remember, apologize. But taking, going back to Charles Stewart's research back in, 2008 or so, where he started looking at data of poll wait times and things and started giving information to election officials where they could go, oh, we hadn't thought of that. That would be super helpful. And then we can maybe change this process or this procedure or this polling place or whatever. Data about the process of election, and I know ASU has done some great work in that area as well, but some of those mechanical things, remember, election officials, and I will speak from my own experience, I when I was in college, I didn't go, gosh, I want to be Secretary of State someday. That would be so cool. And so I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be Secretary of State. None of that was planned, and it didn't happen in that way. And I think that election officials get good at what they do because of the passion of the public service and knowing that you're safeguarding democracy. And those two things are drivers. And we're not engineers. And a lot of times the election, for example, your election processing center that you process absentee ballots and count ballots on election night is something you inherited and has been the election shop for 20 years. And the processes in that place are there because we only have 20,000 square feet. It's not because we designed it in a way that was really lean and made sense. And that's where I think an area where, not necessarily research, but certainly an area where, students in colleges can help and universities can help guide that. And how do we make it better? How do we make those efficiencies so they can do the work they need to do?
Yeah, I think you're talking about Gretchen Mock's work at Rhode Island. Yeah, and certainly Charles's work on lines. And I think one of the questions about this, though, is what's your advice, though, for how we can transform, again, the research that we do into actionable recommendations, actionable information for someone like you or an election official to use?
In some ways, reach out to them. Because I remember when I first met Mike many years ago, and I found that a lot of the research that was done was more punitive than it was helpful for me as an election official because, some...
You're not talking about my research,
not
right?
Not Mike's research. Mike's research was amazing. But I can tell you that there were a number of universities, and some of them were very personal and were directed at my office or my work that, we know that this thing is happening, that this voter group is being suppressed by this practice that your office is doing, and now we're going to do research to prove it. And unfortunately, that bias works against you. And I know that there's been a number of times in Washington State where they tried to do things like prove that signature verification was so biased that it was disenfranchising young, particularly African American males. And their data show that, and I don't disagree. But it's like, but you need to take it another level. Why? Because those 18-year-old boys don't know that their signature is being checked. And when you contact them and say, your signature didn't match, and that's why we rejected your ballot, it's weird. After that, they don't get ballots rejected because they actually pay attention to their signatures. So sometimes it's the data may show something that you are convinced is what the problem is, but partnering with election officials takes it to that next level and makes that data more usable and ask the election officials where they need help, where are they struggling, where are those gaps. I mean, the first papers that you were writing was about vote by mail and some of the things we were doing in Washington State, and it was those conversations. You know, Mike and Thad Hall came up to Washington and sat down with my elections crew and walked through how we did things, and so that strengthened the paper, it strengthened their assumptions, and it strengthened their conclusions. And so I would say talk to, you know, either the state level or, more importantly, those people in the trenches that are at the local level.
That's great. That's super advice. Thank you. So we're here to talk about AI, of course.
AI, yes.
Yeah. No, that's my fault for getting off topic.
It's all right.
I love to ask election officials to lecture to academics about how academics can do more actionable work in this area. That's, you know, my part of the soapbox here.
Appreciate it.
But let's talk about AI. So what do you think? I want to hear both about opportunities and challenges. So from where you sit and where you've been over the last couple of years, what do you think the main opportunities are for election officials with respect to using AI?
Well, I think at just a 30,000 foot level, it's just force multiplier, and helping them be able to do things that are tedious and repetitive and detail oriented more efficiently and more effectively. And I think we're seeing it as I talk to people around the country. I just got off the phone with Carolina Lopez from the Partnership for Large Election Jurisdictions, and you know, we're seeing some application of looking at voter lists and voter list maintenance, and not so much. Again, I know there's a lot of politicization right now about this topic, but being able to use AI to look at a voter list and find random errors, find duplicate voters, find things in the data that a human is not going to be able to see because it's just too much data, and then being able to follow up on those and improve that quality of the list. You know, being able to do proofing. One of the earlier panels was talking about this, but for an election official in a big complex election, like I don't know what's happening here in Missouri, but Washington State has the most offices and things on the ballot this year. So a county may have 150 different ballot styles. And a ballot style is basically that one style that is unique to the voter, that has all of their issues and races that are unique to them based on their address. And proofing that is, it's like a root canal for people who don't like to proof. And so when you're looking at that, maybe starting by running those ballot styles through AI to start with a clean place to proof. But don't tell your proofers that, because then they won't take it as seriously. But you know, that just might save some time and save some energy. We're seeing certainly applications for translation and accessibility, and these things make me very excited and a little nervous. I'll get to the nervous part in a minute. But you know, you look at some jurisdictions that have 10 or 20 languages that they have to translate all of their materials into. Well, AI is helping that be much more efficient and the purpose, more purposeful in being able to apply it. Signature verification, I think, is another area where banking industry has used this for a long time. Being able to apply that to mail states like Washington and Oregon and Colorado would be at least a place to start. And again, get through all of that, you know, millions of voters that you have to check signatures on, and now you can deal with the anomalies, and then people could deal with those and decide whether they should be accepted or not. And then on the cyber defense side, I think too, being able to have AI monitor some of the traffic that you're seeing over your systems may allow it to roll up trends and indicate possible risks. So those are some of the things I think are good and positive.
Well, you were going to talk about some of the challenges, right?
Oh, of course. Let's see. Probably for me, the biggest one, and it was really appreciated Sam's comments earlier, data and privacy. And I think that this is the challenge. So it's very easy to say, oh, we could just have a chatbot tell people where they're supposed to vote on election day. That's easy. It'll be easy. We'll save call center. We won't need a call center. It'll be great. And all of those things are true. The problem is that you have to connect that at some point to your voter registration system, which has private data in it. And how do you keep that private data secure? How do you keep that whatever the AI tool is you're using from getting access to it or eventually being able to absorb it and make it public? And it's that whole, the guardrails and the security piece. And I think Sam did such a good job of talking about how you not only have to talk about having a policy, but it needs to be specific. And, one thing election officials all know is that, I'm really not worried too much about my election director making a silly mistake, like doing something they're not supposed to do. But I am worried about Mildred, the 70-year-old poll worker who just comes in and answers the phones for us right before the election. She may do something that violates those policies, and how do you keep all of that for all of those levels of experience in place? But it's policies and clear guidelines are really important. Interesting in talking to Carolina, one of the things she said she was hearing from her medium-sized counties, and I hadn't thought of this until she said it, is there is a concern that they are going to lose their jobs because of AI. And they're looking at, say Salesforce, who has just laid off thousands of employees because they don't need them anymore. And, but it's that drilling down. And she said, but you look at Salesforce, for example, and they're okay with a 93% accuracy level for their chatbots on their customer service lines. They're okay with people not being able to get to a human to talk to them and ask a question. And all of that's probably fine in the private sector because you have a business bottom line and you'll pay for that somewhere if you're not doing it well. It's not acceptable in elections. And I think the first or second panel this morning said, what is a human error rate? It doesn't matter. What I can tell you from my personal experience is that if I have a single error in an ad in my 150-page voter pamphlet, that can be turned into something that says you were trying to disenfranchise Hispanic voters because you used the incorrect word and you changed the meaning. Now you take that out to the chatbot who is, driving people to the correct polls. And if they send 10 voters to the wrong polling place and they can't vote because they can't get there in time because they went to the wrong one, I guarantee you'll be on the front page of the paper next. And if it's a close election, that becomes the flashpoint issue. So it's a different standard than the private sector has, and it has to be. And so it goes back to, and we've heard it over and over today, the human oversight cannot be stressed enough, and particularly in elections, and it has to continue. And we heard this all day today too, that the initial fear that most election officials had is, do I let AI in? And now it's, do I want to keep my marriage? Do I want to, not work an 80-hour work week? Do I want to get some sleep before the election? So the crush of all of this technical expertise they have to have, all of the laws they have to follow, and all of the administrative things they need to do are kind of forcing them to say, I got to do something. Something's got to give, and I've got to figure out a way to maximize my resources. So, I think overall the key principle is that AI is here to assist but not replace. And I think the more we can talk to our staffs in those terms, it's going to calm those fears. And it's like, no, it's going to free you up to do other things. We still need you in the mix.
That's great. A great overview and a great perspective. I wanted to just ask you one question to follow up a bit. Looking forward to the midterm elections and the next presidential election cycle, in terms of the ways in which AI might be weaponized and used against election officials, based on your experience with CISA and your knowledge of cybersecurity, do you worry more about AI's use as a cybersecurity issue, as an issue of launching cyber attacks against election officials, or more in terms of launching, the disinformation campaigns or even more subtle forms of influence campaigns?
Both.
That's what I thought you'd say as well. But.
And probably the thing I worry about most is that AI makes it so scalable. And makes it, again, as we've heard today, it makes it very easy for people with very little skill to be able to do some pretty nefarious things. And there's a lot of things we've gamed out and tried to anticipate of what could happen. Right now the deepfake technology is not that good. I mean, some of it's getting better, but it's still not there. but by 28, it'll be here. And so how can election officials continue to fight this? I think some of it does rest with AI being a countermeasure, but yes, I think both of those scenarios are real, and those threats continue.
So how is AI factoring into your company's vision for the future?
It's just trying to anticipate how it's going to evolve, how people are going to use it, and again, how are they going to do things at scale? So we saw, like I said, in 24, we saw 250 bomb threats called in. I would anticipate that we're going to see much bigger numbers, and it's going to hit the whole country. I think they've detected it in 12 states. Going back to 24, what is it going to be in 26? And it's going to be a 1-2 punch. It's not going to just be a cyber attack. It's just not going to just be something in that sphere. It's also going to be on the misinformation side. And make no mistake, it's very easy to think it's only going to come from one side of the aisle. Oh no, it's going to not only come from one side of the aisle, it's going to come from foreign adversaries pretending to be from one side or the other.
Excellent. So we have some time for questions. We have a couple questions. Anybody have a question for Kim? I can keep asking questions, of course, but sure. Let me just run the microphone down to you. You've already introduced yourself, so.
Hi, my name is Lamonte. I work for Verified Voting. But in 2022, I was working at an elections office in Lexington, Kentucky, and we were lucky enough to have an IT department. And I was really surprised when the IT director said that there were attacks from, Iran and Russia and China. And so I kind of wonder, if one of those is successful, how does a country undermine our elections? And then you also just mentioned scalability of bugs or whatever like that. And so I'm wondering if the, gap between infrastructure and information keeps getting wider or something. What are the, vulnerabilities that we have if we don't detect something immediately?
I think, make no mistake, our foreign adversaries aren't resting. They might be pausing because they don't really get midterm elections, and or at least up to now haven't gotten that. But I guarantee you that they haven't stopped. And I think one of the saddest things about post 2020 in particular, but even post 16, is instead of us talking about nation-state actors like Iran and China and Russia attacking our elections, U.S. elections, we started talking about collusion. And then in 2020, we started talking about a rigged election. And what has happened is that the country missed what was really going on. Make no mistake, our foreign adversaries want to bring us down from within because it's way cheaper and easier. It is way cheaper than buying a plane or a tank or a bomb to buy, computers and set up a bot farm. And so I worry that we have lost sight of that, and it's become so politicized on both sides that people have forgotten that that's really what started all this. They started sowing those seeds in 14, 16, and now it has grown into, we're seeing that political division. Not even division. The other side isn't just the other side. The other side's the enemy, and they're evil. And that division is dividing communities, it's dividing families, it's dividing our country. And we have to get back to some of those narratives and realize the real threat is coming from, some of it's domestic, make no mistake, but some of that's fueled by these foreign actors. And I think that that also might be a place for the research community to be looking at, that activity. Let's go back and look at 12 or 16 and 20 and 24. What was that internet traffic looking like? What was the social media traffic looking like? And more importantly, where was it coming from? Because that's the thing we've really lost, is people are afraid to talk about any of that stuff because of the political consequences. But we need to be talking about it, and we need to be talking about it in apolitical terms. And all of you in the research community can do that, because you can take data and break it down and make it meaningful. And I think because of that chilling effect over the last few years, universities are afraid to do that, but I would encourage you to start looking at some of that work that was done by, like I said, UW and Stanford in particular, and what can you do and bring to the modern era that puts into context what was happening then.
So that's a great question and a great way to end this session. So thank you, Kim. I really appreciate your comments.